Well, let's continue with our coverage on the 2025 budget speech scheduled to start at around 2 o'clock this afternoon. My colleague Michelle Craig is joining us live from Parliament. Michelle, once again, a very good morning. Building up to this budget speech later on this afternoon, one of the questions is relating to the economist, because on one end, it is about the structural reforms that are required to actually have an economy that creates jobs. But as we can see, our GDP is also struggling.
Absolutely. Good morning, Aldrin. And, it's interesting that you talk about creating jobs. The President was in the National Assembly yesterday answering some questions from MPs. And one of the issues, as always, is around growing the economy and creating employment. And we know how important things like infrastructure spend are to that goal. But here we are, still in Cape Town. The countdown continues to budget. Is it 1.2, 2.0? Let's bring in Simon Schaefer. He's an economist at Deloitte Africa, and he joins us here outside the Parliament building. Simon, it's great to talk to you. What are you expecting today?
Well, firstly, I guess the big question everybody has on mind is what's going to happen with the VAT.
Yeah.
I'm expecting a small increase, potentially not the 2 percentage points that the minister wants. But I'm more interested, to be honest, in what are the plans for growing the economy. And as you said, we need this infrastructure investments to grow the economy, create jobs, and so on.
So obviously, economists, investors as well will be keeping a close eye on what the minister will have to say this afternoon. From the investment front, what would we be focusing on?
I think the most critical point is transparency, accountability, and that we follow through with the plans that we have promised. Investors want to have a certain environment when they deploy their money into an economy. They want to know that they will get the returns that they're expecting, and that there's no shift in or abrupt shift in policies which derails the investments.
Yeah. And when we, almost a month ago, were in Cape Town, and I believe you spoke to us back then as well, building up to the budget that never was, what kind of impact does that have on things like investor confidence? We might say on the one hand, it is an act of democracy in action. These are coalition partners who did not agree and forced the finance minister to go back to the drawing board. But from an investor perspective, what does that look like, postponing the tabling of the budget?
So let's start with the point why it was postponed. It was the argument over the 2 percentage point increase of VAT. For me, I think, as you said, it's a good sign for democracy that we have robust conversations about such important issues, and because it hits the poorest the hardest, potentially. Maybe the timing of everybody was here, everybody's waiting, and then it was literally, half an hour?
Yeah.
15 minutes before we were told nothing is happening. If the timing had been managed a little bit better, it would have been better for investors, I guess, as well.
It's one way to annoy everybody for money spent getting to Cape Town, accommodation and the like. But yeah, the President, as I was telling you when we were discussing it off air, Simon, was in the National Assembly yesterday talking about the National Development Goals. As always, we talk about, it's the age-old conversation, and one that we can't seem to get to the finish line on is this issue of creating jobs. Growing the economy. The President tells us yesterday that our goal for 2030 is to have 30% infrastructure spend in the country. That's one way of driving the economy. At the moment, we've got 15%.
Yes, that's a clear indication that we are underinvesting into infrastructure. The sweet spot, as the President pointed out, is the 30% gross fixed capital formation as share of GDP. We need to push that up a little bit, but I think if you look at the budget and what happened over the last few years,
where will the money come from?
The allocation towards infrastructure has actually gone down as a percentage of overall spending. Good question, where's the money coming from? I think the revenue collection side is not the big issue, it's the spending side. Where are we losing money? Where can we be more efficient with the use of our money?
Yeah.
I think that's the crux of the matter.
Look, we've done a great job with Eskom, haven't we? We didn't have load shedding for 10 months, yes. Just before the budget speech, we had stage 6 load shedding just over this past weekend. We had stage 3 load shedding as well. So we've done the spend there on the maintenance and infrastructure side. Now we need to look at things like ports.
Ports, the railways, the roads. We both are from Joburg. We know how the roads are in Joburg. That's one of the important things. And I spoke to a friend who runs a manufacturing business, and he says he operates in a special economic zone. There, the infrastructure is great, but once you step out of the gates, of those zones, the infrastructure is not as good as inside. And what's the point of having good infrastructure inside if you don't have it outside?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to this VAT hike. We had the prospect of 2% on the table on the 19th of February. What's your sense now? Look, we don't have a leaked budget speech this time around, but what is your sense now? Because there will be a VAT hike, won't there, most likely?
I guess the minister will hold his ground, but he needs to make a compromise on that. Potentially we're going to get 0.5 percentage points, maybe 1 percentage point. But the question is, how does that translate into prices at the shops? Will the retailers stick to the 0.5% or will they just mark it up by 1%?
Yeah, and I mean, it's, as always, the most vulnerable and the poorest among us that will feel the pressure of that 0.5 or whatever the VAT hike turns out to be. What is ironic, and you mentioned this to me earlier, is what the minister was talking about in the 2%, the possibility of a 2% VAT hike, was for the funding of the social relief of distress grant. So you're hiking prices, but you're funding the SRD grant.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? No, but the thing is, if you look at the spending patterns of the poorest households in this country, and you can look at Stats SA data, they say that 50% of the poorest households spend, or 50% of the household spend goes to food, right? And already the basket is fairly undiversified in terms of items that they're buying. It's your milli meal, it's
really just
the basics, which are already zero rated in tax, right? So now the minister's saying we're going to expand that basket. We're going to include some protein, some meat cuts, and so on, which will potentially increase the variety on the tables of the poorest. However, once it comes to other products, such as toiletries, clothing, stationery for kids at school, all these items will attract that higher VAT and then hurt the poorest.
Yeah, I mean, when Statistics South Africa released those numbers on household spends, it's shocking just how much of a monthly income, as you say, goes to food and how much is actually left for anything else in the context of school uniforms, school fees and the like. But you know that things are really bad, that the economy is really putting pressure on all of us, when even the wealthy are feeling the impact of the cost of living crisis.
Do you mean that we have one less dinner out at a restaurant or one pair of shoes less?
Indeed.
Well, it's not really impacting our lives, does it, right? If we are honest and compare it to the poorest. But again, that goes to the point of the critical importance of growing this economies, growing jobs, and putting people into work.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, it's a great pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming on to 405. We're outside the gates of Parliament there. Simon Schaefer is an economist with Deloitte Africa. We're getting all kinds of analysis, Eldrin, as we build up to the budget speech set to be tabled at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Michelle Craig there outside Parliament. So